2024 has been one heck of a year for horror. Making a top 10 list was no easy feat, and I want to address some inevitable criticism before it even comes up. First, this list is horror and horror-adjacent movies. It's possible that you may disagree that some of these movies should be included in the list. That's fine, just ignore them. Also, while there is an order to this list, nothing is set in stone. It's possible that if I rewatched everything and deeply reflected, I might change my opinion on the rating or the order of any of these movies, but at least for the time being, I'm pleased with the list and the general order of it. Finally, I'll try not to spoil anything. All of these movies are worth checking out and experiencing for yourself. Number 10. There have been a handful of spooky rom-coms released this year, but the best of the lot has to be Humanist Vampire Seeking Consenting Suicidal Person. The title alone will give you the gist of the film. Sasha is a vampire that doesn't want to kill anyone. Her family is getting annoyed and frustrated that she can't fend for herself, and thus the plot begins. But where this movie really comes alive is through the stellar performances of the two leading characters, as well as everyone else, frankly. Amazing humor that had me laughing repeatedly, and great editing. There are so many great moments throughout, and everything is just so damn charming. If you want a romantic comedy, coming-of-age horror movie, it's hard to beat this one. Number 9. Look, I don't want to spoil any surprises in this one, but The Coffee Table is one of the most viscerally upsetting movies of the year with a surprisingly understated tone a lot of the time. It is the darkest of comedies where you will uncomfortably laugh at a moment of irony or just the simple absurdity of it all, but you will also feel the tension that courses through all the mundane and casual conversations. It sags a little in the middle, but for the most part, it's very captivating, and when the moment happens, oh boy, what a moment. I can't say too much about it. Check it out and see for yourself. Number 8. This year, I decided to finally watch all of the Alien movies. I really liked the original, so what could go wrong? A lot, as it turns out. None of them capture the atmosphere and horror of the original. The franchise takes a lot of big swings and dabbles with a lot of different ideas and concepts, but in my opinion, just about none of them actually work. Enter Alien Romulus. This felt like a delightful return to form after 45 years and is my favorite Alien film since the original. I understand that some people find it boring and derivative, and I think that some of the references and callbacks to previous movies are poorly done and don't add anything. Those are easily the worst part of the movie. But where Romulus succeeds is after all this time, finally capturing the atmosphere of the original while still adding a few twists and turns. It's fascinating to see a corporate space mining colony in the first act, and David Johnson brings Andy to life in such a sympathetic way. The zero gravity sequence and the use of facehuggers as monsters in and of themselves were also creative and welcome additions. Overall, it's a well done movie that gives me what I've wanted from this franchise since I saw the first one. Number 7. I absolutely adore media about media. Whether that's found footage that places a reflexive emphasis on the act of recording, the WNUF Halloween special recreating 80s commercials, or Misery being a lovely story about an author having a fun winter retreat writing their novel. You'll notice this trend as we continue through this list. Late Night with the Devil falls squarely in this category because it's about, what else? A talk show with Jack Delroy. The style, premise, and performances are second to none and perfectly capture what they were going for. I love the allusions to Uri Geller versus James Randi and the Satanic Panic. The plot is serviceable and there's some rough CGI, but this is still a great movie with an amazing setting and concept. Number 6. Out of all the movies on this list, Stopmotion might be the most at risk of being ranked lower on a rewatch. The story isn't anything to write home about, it's good enough, but that's about it. But where this movie shines brightest, unsurprisingly, is the visuals. There's such a clear love and passion for stop motion animation. I love the design of the Ash Man, and stop motion isn't afraid to get visceral and disgusting, but not through the usual horror fare of violence and gore. Look at this little freak. There's something so unnerving about it, so perfectly crafted to make me uncomfortable. God, I love it. So the story and the characters, they're good enough, and it's everything else that brings it to the next level and makes it my number 6 of the year. Number 5. Okay, right off the bat, let me admit a couple things. I'm a sucker for found footage, and I'm an even bigger sucker for anthologies. Put those together, and VHS is a genuine contender for my favorite horror franchise for that exact reason. It places a spotlight on various different directors and allows for a fun variety of stories to be told. Furthermore, it's rare to see proper horror short films with resources behind them because those aren't being played in theaters. But that means that plenty of interesting stories that wouldn't fill a 90-minute runtime wouldn't get made if it weren't for things like VHS. I'm singing the franchise's praises, but VHS Beyond in particular is a serious contender for my favorite of the lot. It may be recency bias, but each section in this anthology was unique and compelling. It's between this one and VHS 2, and regardless, VHS Beyond is my 5th best horror movie of 2024. I really had fun with this one. Number 4. In movies, or just about any other media honestly, I tend to prefer character, relationships, and plot over aesthetics. I'll take an ugly looking movie with an amazing script over a beautiful but lifeless blockbuster any day. Substance over style. The top 4 movies on this list don't make me have to choose. They magnificently blend style and substance. Which brings us to the number 4 pick, It's What's Inside. I don't tend to get my hopes up for random horror movies I find on Netflix, but I saw this one was getting some buzz and decided to check it out. What a great decision. I already love the concept, playing a social deduction game with the power to literally switch bodies with other people. The possibilities are endless. And with this kind of premise combined with the messy, dramatic, interpersonal drama between the characters and some underlying mystery elements, it could easily be a confusing dumpster fire. But It's What's Inside manages to keep things clear to the audience at all times without ever spoon-feeding them or making the important mysteries too obvious. Also, the photo flashbacks were a stroke of genius, and I love it both narratively and stylistically. From the concept to the characters to the narrative to the editing, this one is absolutely superb. Number 3. I think the thing I love most about Strange Darling is the movie's relentless destabilization and recontextualization of the viewer's perspective and ideas. Constantly forces you to reconsider or question your assumptions in fascinating ways. Even when I was able to predict the main twist fairly early on, it was still able to surprise and intrigue me in countless other ways. It's a story in 6 chapters, but told out of order. And every chapter is perfectly crafted to make you second-guess the assumptions you're making, large and small. I have seen some weird claims that the movie is like misogynist or red pill bait, and I strongly disagree with those claims. I think most of them come from a very shallow reading. Strange Darling has great tension, some really good comedy, strong performance, and perhaps the best narrative structure of any movie on this list. Number 2. Some people will question whether this coming-of-age story is a horror movie at all. But not only does it dabble in some delightfully twisted imagery, but the themes it explores are absolutely horrific and filled me with a sense of dread. I Saw the TV Glow isn't for everyone. If you go in expecting an analog horror spook fest, you will be sorely disappointed. Plenty of people who have watched this movie walked away bored and disappointed, claiming that not much happens. And I'm not going to attack those people. That's a pretty reasonable accusation, and this movie isn't for everyone. But if you've ever struggled with feeling that you aren't the person you're supposed to be, that you're not living the life you thought you would, that you are living artificially or inauthentically, then I think there's a good chance that this movie will horrify and resonate with you in equal measure. Let's talk about some honorable mentions before we get to our number 1. These are all movies that didn't make the top 10, but I still think deserve some recognition and discussion. Folk horror isn't a subgenre that I flock to, but given how consistently I stumble into watching one that impresses me, maybe I should. The Devil's Bath is a psychologically oppressive, slow burn narrative that almost feels like a spiritual successor to The Witch. It's a wonderful display of the horrors that arise from systemic failures and hypocrisies and the very real effects those can and do have. You'll Never Find Me is almost entirely just two characters talking to each other in a small trailer, and I was absolutely enthralled the whole way through. It's a cat and mouse game of paranoia, but you don't know who is the cat and who is the mouse. While the ending is just okay, the dynamic and dialogue between the characters is just so damn good. In a Violent Nature simultaneously has some of the best scenery, one of the best kills, and some of the most boring scenes of any horror released this year. I say that it has boring scenes, but that isn't because they're poorly done. It's because the movie is forcing you, demanding you to slow down and sit in near silence. Tedium is such a risky psychological tool to amplify discomfort in a horror movie, and it doesn't work for everyone, but I think it was just so well done and unique. Also, this movie has perhaps the best example of final girl PTSD that I've ever seen in a slasher. Disappear Completely might just have the most horrifying premise I've ever heard of. Imagine that you've been cursed to lose your senses one by one until eventually they're all gone. You'd still be alive, but you wouldn't have any perception of the world around you, just trapped with your thoughts and the senseless void. While it may not explore this premise as in-depth as I would like, it still does a pretty good job and is worth checking out for the concept alone. Milk and Cereal is a found-footage horror movie with good performances, a nice script. Oh, and it was also made for just $800 and is available to watch right now on YouTube. Somehow Curry Baker was able to make something better than some of the biggest studios out there with creative storytelling and making the most out of what he had. This should sincerely be an inspiration to anyone who is interested in making films but worried that they don't have big studio money. Clearly, you don't need that to make something worthwhile. Finally, this is my oddball pick. Mr. Crocket isn't an amazing movie. The pacing is off and the scripting could use a lot of work. But the twisted, supernatural children's TV host Mr. Crocket is absolute gold. Elvis Nolasco puts on a stellar performance, the design is strong, and I love the props and set of his world. I unironically think that Mr. Crocket has potential to be a modern horror icon, but sadly I think the movie will be forgotten as the mediocre film on Hulu, which is tragic. If you want a little bit of Candyman meets Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, and don't mind it being rough around the edges, I'd recommend checking this one out. Number 1. You saw the thumbnail and you've probably heard the hype. The Substance masterfully combines its plentiful influences from The Fly to The Shining to The Elephant Man to create something unique, original, and refreshing. This movie is such a fascinating blend of energetic, stylish entertainment on one hand and grotesque, tragic, thoughtful horror on the other. It knows exactly what it wants to be, and there's not a wasted moment in the entire thing. Whether it is disorienting the audience, exploring its themes, or moving the plot forward, this movie is spectacular. It does kind of feel like the sort of thing that will eventually have a backlash and a bunch of people will start getting annoyed about all the hype that it's received, and I get that, but at the same time, for me, it lived up to the hype. It's so skillfully crafted and polished, every detail throughout the over 2-hour runtime is captivating. If somehow you haven't seen The Substance, let me join the chorus of voices online telling you that you should really give it a try. And there we go, the top 10 horror of 2024. But this year wasn't all good. If you want to hear about the bottom 10 instead, I'll be uploading a video on that within the next week, and it'll be on the screen when I do. Meanwhile, if you want a deeper dive where I rank every single horror movie of 2024, I will be uploading an exclusive bonus video up on my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and man, what a year for horror.